We'll start, as is our custom, with the parsha in a nutshell. And it's Behaloscha. That's the name of the parsha. And if you were a little tired of all the laws in the third book, you came to the right week and the right place, because here we begin with the drama. There's plenty of drama. The Jewish people finally are moving away from Sinai and moving toward the destination, which is supposed to be the land of Israel. It's supposed to be there very quickly. But of course, like all good stories, there are many, many, many bumps in the road until we get to next week, where we read about the big bump that delays them for 40 years. But right now, we're still optimistic, and we're about to head out and leave Sinai after a little bit more than a year. Almost a year. After almost a year, 10 days minus 10 days fewer than a year. And we're about to head out to the land of Israel. And you're going to get some of the stories that happen. So we get stories this week, so that's good. So I'm going to share the screen, read the parsha in a nutshell. So Aaron is commanded to raise light in the lamps of the menorah, and the tribe of Levi is initiated into the service of the sanctuary. And that's really the name of the parsha. Behaloscha comes from the word when you raise the lamp, when you light the candle. In biblical Hebrew, lighting a candle is raising a candle. We'll talk about why that is, but that's the name of the parsha. Now, we start with the episodes. A second Passover is instituted in response to the petition, "Why should we be deprived?" by a group of Jews who were unable to bring the Passover offering in its appointed time because they were ritually impure. So what happens is, it came the first anniversary of the Exodus, so you have to have the first Seder. So God says, okay, we're gonna celebrate the Passover Seder, which is surrounded around the ritual of the Paschal offering in biblical times. But there are people who cannot offer the Paschal offering because they are ritually impure. They touched a dead body. So they're sort of excluded. So they complain and they say, why should we be excluded? And that's a good claim. So Moshe turns to God, and God says, you know what? We have a second Passover. Second Passover is for the people who missed the first Passover, and they had a second chance. Wonderful. God instructs Moses on the procedures for Israel's journeys and encampments in the desert. And the people journey in formation from Mount Sinai, where they had been camped for nearly a year. So in this week's parsha, we finally get the verses. Finally, we're ready to go after a full year. You know, before you go on a trip, you start packing, and you have to figure out, how much clothing am I taking? Am I taking enough clothes, not enough clothes, winter clothes, summer clothes? My grandmother, when she would pack, okay, I don't want to talk about her, but when she would pack for all seasons. Who knows what could happen? In any case, so we're at Sinai for a year, and we're about to move, and we start moving, finally. What happens as soon as you hit the road? Obviously, what happens? The kids start complaining. They say, are we there yet? The people are dissatisfied with their bread from heaven, the manna, and demand that Moses supply them with meat. Moses appoints 70 elders to whom he imparts of his spirit to assist him in the burden of governing the people. This is an underestimate. This is a very poor retelling of the story. It doesn't account to Moshe's disappointment and frustration and anger at the fact that the people were complaining. They want to go back to Egypt, where they had good food. At least that's what they say. And this is a very, very, very painful episode for Moshe, described in the Torah portion very beautifully. Finally, the final episode of the Torah of the story is Miriam speaks negatively of Moses and is punished with leprosy. Moses prays for her healing, and the entire community waits 7 days for her recovery. And then we continue to next week, which is the episode of the spies. So this 5-line description of the drama is just in a nutshell, and it does not do justice to what's really happening. So we'll try to get a feel by reading some of the actual verses. God willing, we'll get there. We first have to deal with the beginning of the parsha, and we'll do that first. Simultaneously, if anybody has any questions or comments that you want to talk about specifically, let me know, and then we can focus on that, because otherwise you'll have to hear what I'm interested in, may not be what you're interested in, so we'd better that we get on the same page. Okay. Let's start from the beginning. What is the beginning? The beginning is the commandment that Aaron light the menorah. Okay. it gets even more strange because 3 verses into the portion, it starts telling us how to make the menorah. We already know how to make the menorah. The menorah was already made. Nevertheless, this is the workmanship of the menorah, hammered out gold. From its base to its flower, it's hammered out. According to the vision that Hashem showed Moses, so did he make the menorah. I ask you, where should have this verse been placed? Not in the 4th book, which is the episode of the Jewish people traveling through the desert. It should have been placed in the 2nd book of the Torah, in the book of Exodus, where they build the tabernacle, where they build the Mishkan, and where they build all of the other vessels of the temple. So why all of a sudden are we focusing on the menorah? And not only the menorah, but we're also telling you how to build the menorah, meanwhile it was already built. So that is a question that everybody has to deal with. What is the menorah doing here? We'll start with Rashi. Rashi gives an interpretation, but there's so many in other words, so many other commentaries, and everybody has something to say about this topic. By the way, you talk about the menorah, it's a symbol. All the rabbis like talking about the menorah. It's very inspirational. So everybody has got something to say here. I want to just do Rashi and give a little sample, but the reason why I really want to talk about it, because I think that this little passage is really setting the stage for the rest of the parsha. So if you really want to understand all the episodes, what happened at the rest of the parsha, you have to understand what happens right here at the menorah. Okay, fine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open the Rashi, and we'll see what Rashi talks about. Why are we mentioning the menorah? Parsha text. Share the screen. And you're the only one who doesn't see the screen. You have to trust that I'm saying the truth. Trust that what I'm saying.
I have implicit trust.
Okay. So we're going to read the Rashi. So here are the verses, Numbers chapter 8. This is the opening statement of this parsha. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall cast their light toward the face of the menorah. Okay, commandment to light the menorah. By the way, it's the 3rd time it is written. We already know Aaron's supposed to light the menorah. That's just part of the question. Okay, so let's look at when you light. Why is this portion dealing with the menorah juxtaposed to the portion dealing with the chieftains? In other words, what is it doing here? Last parsha, what was the end of last parsha? Last parsha, there were many, many verses. The longest parsha in the Torah is because the Torah spends so many verses describing the gift that the leaders of each tribe gave to the temple when the temple was inaugurated. And it tells you each tribe, and it lists on the first day was Judah, the chief of tribe of Judah, and lists the entire gift. The next day is the next one, and it lists the entire simultaneous gift. And that's the end of last parsha. We didn't get to it last week, but everybody wants to know why does it have to be spoken about so at length? You could have just said they all gave the identical gifts. But another case, but that's a separate question. Our question is, why are you talking to me about the menorah, reiterating that Aaron lights the menorah after last parsha? What's last parsha? After the menorah, after the temple has been concluded, the gifts were given. So that's Rashi's question. So Rashi has a fascinating answer, quotes the Medrash. For when Aaron saw the dedication offerings of the chieftains, he felt distress over not joining them in this dedication, neither he nor his tribe. So if you look at those gifts, the 12 tribes of Israel, they each gave a gift. Tribe of Levi, who are the priests who work in the temple, they did not give any of the gifts. So Aaron feels bad. Imagine the inauguration, right? The president is inaugurated. Everyone gets an invitation. If you're anybody, if you donate money, if you're, what do they call those people that donate? I don't know. They call them when they collect many donations, whatever they call it, bundling. All the bundlers get invited. Anybody who's anybody in Washington who gets invited to one of the inauguration balls, and you're left out. That's how Aaron feels. So Aaron is his distress. That's the word of Rashi. Distress. Chal shadaito in Hebrew. His mind is weakened. Why? He did not participate in the celebration of the dedication, neither he nor his tribe. So God said to him, by your life, yours is greater than theirs, for you will light and prepare the lamps. So God says, Aaron, you don't feel bad. God sees that Aaron feels bad. So God reiterates, Aaron, remember, you light the menorah. If you light the menorah, don't feel bad. You're just as great as the people, as the chieftains who offer the gifts in the temple, who offer the gifts for the inauguration of the temple. That is the Rashi. Sounds wonderful, except that if you analyze it, both the question and the answer does not really make too much sense. There are many questions on the question and on the answer. So there are all kinds of ways of thinking about this, and I'll give you one interesting one. There's a certain excitement that comes about when you start something new, right? Everybody's excited. When you have a new project, everybody's excited. You first get married, the honeymoon, everybody's happy. You start a new job, you're very enthusiastic. There's a certain energy. You start September, everybody's ready to go to school. All the kids are so excited. Everyone's got their sharpened pencils and their crayons, and everybody is very excited about the experience. And there's a certain excitement in the air. And that is what Aaron sees. Aaron sees that the priests were so motivated that they inaugurated the temple. They're not the priests, the leaders of the tribes are so motivated the fact that the temple was inaugurated that they're moved to the extent that they really want to bring a gift to God. It's wonderful. Aaron did not participate in that. So what does God tell Aaron? God tells Aaron, your job is great. What you do is greater than the excitement of the beginning. What does Aaron do? He lights the menorah at night and at the morning. That doesn't seem as grand as all the gifts that the leaders of the tribes gave. But what Aaron has is consistency, right? And you think about your life. There's sometimes where you have things in the beginning that are very exciting, but then there's something that could you maybe not be as exciting, but be more consistent. So there are some people, I'm that guy, but some people are very good that when they celebrate their anniversary, they buy their wife whatever they want. They buy their wife the wonderful gift. They make it a wonderful experience. Other people are not that good at celebrating the anniversary, but they're very good at every morning making her coffee. Okay, that's an example. So that's the tension here. Aaron sees that there's such an excitement within the Jewish people about the beginning of the inauguration of a temple. He's not part of that. So what does God say? God says, what you do is greater. Why is it greater? God doesn't explain why it's greater, because you do it every day, right? If you do it every day, a small step every day, in some sense is greater than big change. And you have this in many areas in life. Some people, they have to change their lifestyle because they went to the doctor and the doctor says, okay, you have to change. So they sign up to the gym, and for a week, they run in the gym 2 hours a day, and then they stop, right? Then you have other people who are going to not be as ambitious in the beginning, but they're consistent. They make small change, but consistent change. And that's what God is saying. Light in the menorah, a little bit of light. It's not as grand as the gifts of the priest. It doesn't take up that much space in the Torah, but because it's consistent, that is why it is celebrated, and that is why it is greater than the grand gift that comes at the beginning. So that's one idea. Everybody has something to say about this. The most famous one is the Ramban, Nachmanides. Nachmanides asks an interesting question. Nachmanides asks, if you think about Aaron in the temple, Aaron does not just light the menorah. What does Aaron do? Aaron does everything, really. The priests and Aaron's tribe, they do everything. They offer the offerings. They bring the incense in the morning and at night. They make like I said, the incense. Everything that happens in the temple is Aaron and his sons. So why is it that of all the things that God wants to pacify Aaron and say, don't worry, your position is greater than the leaders of the tribes, why does God pick the menorah? Right? He says, your portion is greater than their portion. Why? Because you light the candles. So the Nachmanides asks, why doesn't it say you offer the incense? Ktoret, which in some sense is the most spiritual service in the temple. That's what the high priest did when he went into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. The incense is the most spiritual service in the temple. It's smell. Smell is related to the soul much more than sight. Sight is more physical than smell, at least according to the Kabbalah. Smell goes deeper with even, I think today, scientists the scientists understand that smell goes straight up to the brain with fewer sensors, so it reaches deeper within the self, and that's why smell brings back memory. Spiritually speaking, smell is very deep. So God should have comforted Aaron with the incense. Why with the menorah? So the Nachmanides says something very interesting. Nachmanides says, if you look at Jewish history, you will see that of all the rituals that are done in the temple, the only one that survives after the destruction of the temple is the menorah. Why? Because we light the menorah on Hanukkah to commemorate the menorah of the temple, right? We don't offer incense to remember the incense that were offered in the temple. We talk about it in the prayer, right? There's a verse that says that by our mouth, by speaking, we substitute for not bringing the offerings. So too, we mention the Torah, the incense, every day in the prayer. We list how it's made and how it's offered, because spiritually, by speaking about it, we evoke that energy. But we don't do anything. The menorah is the only ritual, the only mitzvah of the temple that survives throughout all the generations through the ritual of Hanukkah. So it's a little bit different, but Hanukkah is really commemorating the light of the menorah. So Nachmanides says he's looking at it from the historical event, from the historical view, 1,000 years after the destruction of the temple. And he says, you know why God pinpoints the menorah and says, yours is greater than theirs because you light the menorah, because the menorah turns out to be that which survives throughout Jewish history. Okay, these ideas are just an introduction to what I really want to say. And what I really want to say is that this is an introduction to the rest of the parsha. Cheers. Chaim. Okay, so what's happening in this parsha is very quickly. Okay, you know what? Should I leave it alone? Maybe we'll get back to it. Okay, I'll give you the spoiler and then I'll give you the thesis and then I'll prove it later. Prove it this week and next week and the week after. But first I'll lay out the thesis. So the thesis is as follows. The tension, the obstacles and the sins and the complaints of the Jews is because the Jewish people are struggling to balance both the physical and the spiritual, right? If you tell somebody that it's your job to be the high priest, separated and secluded from the world, go move to a monastery somewhere in India, go climb the Himalaya and go climb the Everest in Nepal, go separate yourself from society. That is relatively speaking easy. If you tell somebody your job is to go to work and pay the bills and farm the land, that is also relatively easy. The problem is when you try to when you're supposed to do what the Jew is supposed to do, the Jew is supposed to do both. And to try to figure out how I'm supposed to want to be in the temple, but then I'm supposed to want to go to Israel and work the land, that is a very difficult balance to strike. And because that's a difficult balance to strike, what you will see is that all the sins that are described and all the complaints that are described in the desert, you will see that it's the Jewish people going to one extreme. Either they ask for meat, which represents the most materialistic pleasure, or they say we want to stay in the desert, which means we don't want to go into the physical land of Israel. Or they say we want to be high priests. That's Korach's rebellion. Why is only Aaron the high priest? We all want to be high priests. But what you see is that they're swinging back and forth to extremes. Do you want steak or do you want to be the high priest? What is it that you want? And the answer is we're having trouble getting to the middle. The balance. Judaism is about balance. And the balance is what's hard. And what Moshe is slowly trying to get through to the people about the importance and how to handle this balance. And that's the struggle and that's the tension. So if that's the case, if this thesis is correct, and again, like I said, I'm just putting it out here, but we could probably show it later in this parsha and certainly in next parsha and the following parsha. If that's what it is, how to get the balance, and all the complaints are running to one extreme to another extreme because it's easy to be extremist. It's very hard to walk a balance. Then what is the opening scene of Behaloscha? The opening scene of this parsha is that when you travel, the opening symbol, we talk about symbols in Judaism. I say this many times because people find this interesting, that we know that Judaism does not believe in symbols, right? In the Ten Commandments, God says, do not make any, lo tasdacha pesel, don't make any idol or even any form of anything. We don't do symbols in Judaism. So, but the problem is we do find some symbols. We have the menorah, we have other symbols. So there's a beautiful commentary by Rabbi Shamshon Fal here. She says something beautiful. He says that our symbols are not like the symbols of other religions or pagan religions. Our symbols are completely different. Whereas in other faiths, the symbols is a symbol for God. Symbol for God. We don't have a symbol for God. You can't have a symbol for God. God is infinite. By definition, if you try to define him with a symbol, you're missing the point. And it's idol worship because it's not God. Because God is infinite. And infinite means by definition, if you're infinite, you're undefined. So what then is the symbol? The symbol, any symbol you will find in Judaism is a symbol of what you should become. not what God is, but what you have to strive to become. So let's look at the menorah as a symbol. And we know the state of Israel adapted the menorah as their symbol. What is this? What is the menorah? The menorah is a symbol. We have to produce light. That's what we do. So in other words, light is the most spiritual thing that we could see. I said before, smell. Okay, so you could try to figure out which one is more spiritual in different ways. But in Kabbalah, the metaphor for holiness is light. So if a Jew is supposed to bring light to the world wherever he goes, means you're the menorah, you're the candelabrum that you carry the light wherever you go. That's your mission. And now the problem is how do we internalize that in our day-to-day life? And that is the conflict that arises. The people are not really able to get the balance between be a menorah, but be in the world as well. Be a menorah while you're in the world, or while you're eating dinner, or while you're pursuing your own physical pursuits. Could you do both together? That's really the calling of a Jew. And in that sense, it takes time to learn how to do that. And that's why it's not surprising that there's so much difficulty. Because again, you want me to go to Israel, you want me to succeed in the land, so I have to move away from Sinai. I have to move away from the concept of spirituality. You want me to be spiritual? Very easy to be spiritual. I'll seclude myself. I don't want to get involved in the world. You want me to do both? Oh, that's already complicated. And that's tension, and that's a difficulty. So that is a little bit about the menorah as the symbol for our mission as we start leaving Sinai. We're leaving Sinai, but we're heading somewhere. Where are we heading? What do the people have to know? So last two portions, we read about the organization of the camp, how to travel. Temple is in the center, and we have the three camps around the temple, and there are four camps, around the temple, three tribes in each camp. So you have the physical formation. Okay, that's what you need to know. You have to know how are we going to form. But then you have to know what is our message? Where are we going? Why are we going? Oh, that's the symbol of the menorah. We're going to bring light into Israel, to wherever we go. And that is the image of what this nation is all about, taking the light of Sinai through the menorah and bringing it to the physical world, which is much easier said than done. How do I know? I see the stories here to prove it. Okay, that's by way of introduction. One more introduction. Take Vicky's question in one second. One more introduction about the second Passover, which is also critical, and then we'll start going to some of the drama. Go ahead.
Oh, I just, that's, we know the beautiful comparison. The menorah is the goal, the menorah is the symbol, but I couldn't find in the Torah, where does it say that that's more, the task of Aaron is more important than the other sacrifices? I couldn't find it in the Parsha.
That is in the Rashi from the Medrash. So if you look, the Rashi from the Medrash, right? We read it earlier. So he says, when Aaron saw the dead, you look at the screen, Vicky, look at the screen. I'm reading the Rashi. When Aaron saw, I'm pointing. When Aaron saw the dedication offerings of the chieftains, he felt distressed over not joining them in his dedication, neither he nor his tribe. So God said to him, by your life, yours is greater than theirs. Okay, why? Why is Aaron's portion greater than the Nesiim? For you will light and prepare the lamps. So right away, Nachmanides says, light and prepare. That's from Tanchuma, that's from the Medrash. And okay, it's from the Medrash, but you see what God is doing. God mentions here, again, because you have to ask why we mention the menorah here. So the Medrash says because Aaron feels bad, so he has to be reassured. Don't worry, you also have something great. What are we choosing of everything that that God could have highlighted of what Aaron does? Because Aaron does a lot, but we specifically choose the menorah. Oh, so there's something about the menorah that is more important than the other services in the temple, even though everything is important, but there's something unique about the menorah. So either you follow Nachmanides, which says because that's what it's really related, that because that's what lasts till today, the Hanukkah menorah lasts till today, or you could say what I'm saying is that this is the symbol of what the Jew is supposed to do, or you could say both together. Why is it that the Hanukkah menorah lasts till today? Because that's what we're supposed to do. And in some sense, the fact that we can light the menorah in the darkness, in the spiritual darkness, after the destruction of the temple, that just highlights what the menorah is. The theme of the menorah is to bring light. It's very easy to bring light when you're in the temple, much harder to bring light when you are in exile, or at least spiritual light when you're in exile. And that's why in America, it turns out that Hanukkah is probably the most, I think Hanukkah is the most celebrated holiday. People think it's because we want to compete with Christmas. Not true, because Nachmanides says that greater than any other service in the temple is the service of the menorah, because that's our mission statement as Jews. So whether or not we know it consciously or subconsciously, that's the reality. That is why Hanukkah has the best as the most participation in this country, because that's the truth. Now, people may not know this or feel this innately or feel this consciously, but that's the deeper meaning, and that's the subconscious. You see a menorah, you say, if you're a Jew, you see a menorah, you feel connected. That's the way it works. Okay, I want to get in and out of the Passover story in 5 minutes. I'll try, because I want to give some of the drama that follows. So we'll try to get in and out, but I think it's also important because, again, I believe that this portion is also critical to understand everything that's going to follow the second Passover. The first thing that's interesting to point out about the second Passover, and I'll share the screen. This is the third reading. The first thing to point out is to point out the dates. The Lord spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the second year of their exodus from the land of Egypt, in the first month, saying, the children of Israel shall make the Passover sacrifice in its appointed time. So if you want to do the Hebrew dates, first month is Nisan. Passover is the 15th of Nisan. But you can't just show up to people and say, tonight is Passover. You got to give them a warning. And if you actually go back in Egypt, the first year, when the Jewish people were still in Egypt, the year that they left, God indeed came to them the first of Nisan and said, in 10 days you take the lamb, and in 14 days you slaughter the lamb, and in 15 days it's Passover. And that's when you're going to leave Egypt. And 1 year later, the same pattern reoccurs. God comes to the Jewish people, comes to Moshe on the first of Nisan, and he says, let the Jewish people make the Passover sacrifice in its appointed time. Wonderful. So beautiful. What a beautiful story. The problem with this story is the order. Okay? Why am I saying that? If you have a book, you could look. I don't want to start switching the screen. It's going to take too long. But if you open up the book, and you open up the book of if you open up the fourth book of the Torah, if you have an art scroll, it's on 726, 727. So it's the fourth book, Numbers chapter 1. Let's read when the fourth book opens. That's 3 portions ago. Okay, when does that open? Hashem spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai at a tent of meeting on the first of the second month. Something is a problem. Okay, the story that opens the fourth book appears is actually happened 1 month after the story of the second Passover, which appears in the third portion of the fourth book. It's out of order. It's out of order. We should have started from the second Passover and then spoke about the formation in the desert. That is the question. And that's an obvious question. If you just, even without any commentaries, if you read the actual story, read the actual story, you're going to run into that question. Rashi answers that question. I'm not going to get into Rashi's answer right now, but this is one of the main proofs that Ein Seder Mukdam Muchar BaTorah, the commentaries say, the Medrash says, there is no chronological order in the Torah. The Torah is not here. It's not a history book per se. And therefore, the order is not the most important thing. And therefore, if there's any reason to change the order, well, you have to have a reason for it. But if there's a reason to change the order, we're going to change it. And how do you know? The best proof is this section. This section, it's clear that what the portion that begins the fourth book happens after the portion of the second Passover, which is 3 portions into the fourth book. Okay, so what's really happening here? What's the deeper interpretation? So if there's no chronological order, that we derive that from here. But why was it highlighted here? God could have taken any other portion of the Torah, put it out of order to convey the point that there's no order in the Torah. So I'm going to give you a Hasidic commentary from the Rebbe, and then I'm going to tell you what I think. Not contradicting, I'm just saying a different point. What the Rebbe said is fascinating. He says, what is order? Okay, let's stop before you get to order. What is the second Passover? So we know that the second Passover, really the theme of the second Passover is the theme of Teshuvah, the theme of repentance. Why? People were not able to do the mitzvah. They feel bad. They, on their own initiative, turn to God and say, God, please help us to correct the missed opportunity. And God says, okay, I'm giving you a second chance. That's beautiful. It's a very deep, beautiful message of Judaism that there's always a second chance. That is the story of the second Passover. There's always a second chance. Okay, if that's the theme, what is order? Order means the way things should be. If you want to get from point A to point B, if you want to grow, if you want to get to the 8th grade, you have to start with the 1st grade and go to the 2nd grade. Whatever you're going to do, if you're trying to grow in knowledge, there's a chronological order that you have to follow. What is the idea of teshuvah? What is the idea of a second chance? Second chance means even if you did not follow the order, we are going to give you the opportunity to correct. So by definition, the concept of the second Passover is the concept of you could defy the order. Because usually you miss the boat, you have no second chance. That's the orderly fashion. That's the way things should be in it if the world was organized. It was organized in the proper way. But the whole idea of teshuvah is don't worry if you skipped some of the steps. If you skipped some of the steps, don't worry about that because you don't have to go in order. You could skip the order. You could leap over the order. And you could basically transform yourself in a way that is not based on the rule book. And that's why the idea that there's no order in the Torah is alluded to in the second Passover, which is the theme of teshuvah, repentance, which is the theme of there's always a second chance, which is the theme of don't worry if you didn't follow the order. You can always transform and you can always change. So that's one point. I'm going to say one more point to the second Passover, and then I'm going to say what I want to say. See, the problem with this is once you start talking, there's more ideas you want to share. It's very hard to limit yourself, but that's the problem. Okay, let's think about the second Passover for a second. Virtually all the laws of the second Passover are identical to the laws of the first Passover. How do I know? It's a clear verse. I guess it's a clear verse. So let's speak where God introduces the second Passover. The Lord spoke to Moses saying in verse 9, speak to the children of Israel saying, any person who becomes unclean from contact with the dead or is in a distant journey, whether among you or in the future generations, he shall make a Passover sacrifice for the Lord. When should it be done? Exactly 1 month after Passover. In the second month on the 14th day in the afternoon, they shall make it. They shall eat it with unleavened cakes, which is matzah and bitter herbs. They shall not leave over anything from it until the next morning, and they shall not break any of its bones. They shall make it in accordance with all the statutes connected with the Passover sacrifice. Okay, so they're writing, it's really Passover. So what's happening here is you make the second Passover just like the first Passover. All the laws, you can't break a bone, you can't eat it, you can't leave it over to the morning, you have to eat it roasted, you have to eat it with matzah and bitter herbs. It's a replica. Okay, so, but even though the Torah is making the point that it's supposed to be similar, but really what's happening here is that there are at least two very important changes. Changes in the law of the second Passover over the first Passover. Two very significant differences. The first significant difference is that the first Passover is 7 days. If you live in Israel, if you're out of Israel, 8 days. Biblically speaking, it's 7 days. One difference. The second Passover is 1 day. A more surprising difference is that the second Passover, you're allowed to have Chametz in the home. What do we think of Passover is? Right, okay, you have to rid your house of the bread. You're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to own it. Not only you're not allowed to own it, you're not allowed to have it in your house. Not only you can't have it in your house, you're not allowed to own it. So Passover is chametz, the leavened bread, which represents the ego and negativity in those days. It represents the ego and negativity is off limits. Okay, that's Passover. The second Passover, the Mishnah says clearly, you're allowed to have chametz in your house. You can't eat it together with the Passover sacrifice. That's another story. You can't have it on the same table. You can't eat it you can't eat it at your Seder, but you can have all the macaroni and the cake and what else do people like? And the cookies and the danishes and the potato kugel. Potato kugel is not chametz. A potato knish. All the thing, whatever you need, whatever you need, you can have in the cabinet or in the freezer. It's not a problem, which is surprising because the first Passover we're running away from the leavened bread. Second Passover is not a problem. Why? What does this represent? So the Rebbe explains as follows. The first Passover, like we said, is the order. That's the path you should try to follow. When you follow the path we call it the path of the righteous. The path of the righteous is follow the laws of the Torah, try to do it right. Try to do it right means do the first Passover. What are you supposed to do? if you're doing it right, try to remove the negative experiences from your life. Don't seek out challenge, don't seek out pain, don't seek out failures. Try to get rid of the chametz. Okay. What is the second Passover? And by the way, that's why it takes 7 days, because you're going in the normal path. You have to go grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. You're growing step by step. So it takes time, a full week, right? The full week, 7 days is a full week, represents the full cycle of time. And you're trying to separate yourself from negative experiences, because negativity is not going to help you in your quest to become closer to God. Fine. What's the second Passover? The second Passover is not the path of the righteous. It's the path of the person who failed, who missed the opportunity, who sinned. It's the path of teshuvah. Path of teshuvah, we say 2 important messages. Number 1, you don't have to rid your house of the negative experiences, because you already engaged in the negative experiences. Now your job is to grow from the negative experiences. That the pain of the negative experience should intensify your desire to come close to God, should become fuel to do more good. So we want the chametz in the house. When you take the deeper path, the path of the person returning, the negative experience is part of who you are. It's part of who makes you the good person that you are, because you experience the pain of separation. So now we actually want the chametz in the house. And another very important point is, you say, I lost so many years. There's 7 days. I don't have 7 days. I lost all my years. I wasted my time. Doesn't matter. 1 day is enough, because according to Judaism, teshuvah, it says in the Talmud, teshuvah can be in 1 instant. Why in 1 instant? How could you transform your whole life? If I tell you could transform your whole life in 1 instant, what does it sound like? It sounds like I'm not being realistic. Could I really change all my bad habits in one instant? The answer is yes. And what's the metaphor? The metaphor is, what do you need to do teshuvah, to return? You know what you need to do? You don't have to go anywhere. All you have to do is turn around, right? I'm facing away from God. I'm facing away from you. I'm turning my back to you. I could be 100 miles away. I just turn around. I change my orientation. That is teshuvah. Now I'm returned. Now I'm transformed. I'm distant. Doesn't matter if you're distant. Matter is where you're headed, where you're facing. And that act of transformation, you can do that anytime. You can't say, I ran out of time. I wasted so much time, so therefore I won't be able to invest in my relationship. This is an example for anything. Relationships, you have a relationship and you say, I lost 10 years in the relationship. It could be turned around in 1 minute, because if I face you or the other person faces me, that facing each other is the act of restoring the relationship. Same with God, same as with anything else I want to do. If I want to do something, don't turn my back to it, face to it. But that orientation takes 1 moment. And that's why it's only 1 day. And that's why don't escape the negative experiences. Don't deny them. Understand that they're going to intensify who you are, and ultimately they make you a better person. So that's the 2 elements of the second Passover. You may have chametz in your house, you may have the negative experiences in your house, and it's only 1 day. We don't need a lot of time. There's a famous story in the Talmud about a sage who was a terrible sinner, and he was such a big sinner. In the Talmud, everything's to the extreme. The righteous are fully righteous. The sinners are completely sinners. So the Talmud says the story like this. Once upon a time, there was this guy, and his name was Elazar, the son of Dordaya, and he's such a great sinner. He has so much lust. There was not a harlot in the entire land that he didn't sin with, until he heard that there's one harlot in a distant place that he has to go find her. He goes and finds her and sins. And then she tells him something. She says, you're never going to return. You're a lost case. Now, nobody wants to hear they're a lost case. So if somehow or another that shook him to the core. The harlot tells him I'm a lost case. Too much for him to bear. Shakes him to his core. He starts crying. And he's really in pain. And he dies. He dies from the pain. That's what the Talmud says. I'm making up the story. The Talmud says, a voice comes from heaven, a baskol, a voice descends from heaven and says, Elazar ben Adaya merits the world to come. He goes straight to heaven. He repented. Didn't miss any harlots. Doesn't matter. He repented. So the most interesting about the story is the response that's about to come. Rebbe, who's the author of the Mishnah, one of the greatest Talmudic sages of all time, Rebbe hears the story and he starts crying. And he cries. And he says, Yesh kaina lama b'shachas. A person could acquire the world to come in 1 moment. What is he saying? He's saying, how do you fill up your bank account spiritually? In other words, how do you accumulate greatness? Rebbe, it took a lifetime. Why? Because he's Passover 1. You need 7 days. You need time to grow. You need time to become more spiritually sensitive. You need time to increase your understanding of God. This takes time, takes a lifetime. Here you have the second Passover. You don't need a full week, which represents the full cycle of time. 1 minute. If you can find an experience, a negative experience, but a negative experience that could touch you to your core, you skip the order, you skip the line, you can acquire the world to come in 1 moment. So that's the idea of the second Passover versus the first Passover. We're supposed to try to find the first Passover. I don't recommend this. I don't recommend you find every harlot. No, I'm kidding. I don't recommend you look and seek out the negative experiences, right? So we try to go to first Passover. First Passover is the preferred way. Don't look for trouble. Don't look for pain. Don't look for difficulty. But if you engage, if you miss the opportunity and you encounter the negative experience, understand you're in the second Passover. You can outperform the first Passover because you can do it quicker by one transformation, and you can actually elevate that other experience because now the negative experience, the matzah, the chametz, could be part of the experience. That's the story in short. Okay, I wasn't going to say this. It's all by way of introduction. I know it's 10:45, but this is all by way of introduction. Why am I saying this? I think that the reason why the second Passover is placed here is because from here until the end of the book, okay, you ready? Is missed opportunity after missed opportunity after missed opportunity. All we have from here until the end of the fourth book is a series, until almost the end of the fourth book, is a series of failures. So what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to read the story? So I think that the reason why the Torah takes the second Passover away from its natural place in the beginning of the second book, we said that's where, in the beginning of the fourth book, we said that's where it belongs. It takes the second Passover and places it immediately before the debacles begin, before the complaints begin, before the failures begin. It's to tell us, the Talmud says, that God always creates the healing before the pain. There's never an illness where there's no where the pain does not exist. It may take time to discover it, but there's always every illness. If you're in the pharmaceutical business, you understand this is a very optimistic thing. Every illness could be cured. You may take time to get there, but the potential for cure, says the Talmud, precedes the creation of illness. So this is a mystical thing. Before we start reading about the failures, the Torah tells us, don't worry, there's a second Passover. Not only could you correct the failures, but in some way you can actually become, you can grow from the negative experience. And in some sense, you can incorporate the negative experience into making you the better person that you will be. So I think that, again, that the placing of this, the unnatural placing of a second Passover right before the series of debacles is to tell us, don't get afraid. Don't shut the book. Don't think that our hope is lost. No matter what difficulty you will encounter, you can always correct. That's my personal feeling. I have not seen it written anywhere explicitly. This morning when I thought about it, I said, how come nobody wrote it? So probably somebody wrote it. If nobody did, then we'll write it. Okay.
Or maybe that's because we did have some missed opportunities before that also. Before that, there was also missed opportunities. Like it's not like it's the first time.
It's not the first time, but it's the first time that you have a series, one after the other, and even though we had a terrible sin of the golden calf, it didn't really dramatically delay the story. The people who sinned the golden calf, were able to move forward. The people who are going to sin with the spies, they're not allowed to go into Israel. That's a real missed opportunity, right? So that's a real delay. That's the golden calf.
Right. Yeah. So when you go forward, could you please go back to that thought and revisit and kind of see how the story unfolds in that light? When we go next question, and then after that.
Yes, we'll do that. Okay, so now that we did that, I'm just going to read it. You don't have to hear from me. You want to hear from the Torah itself, especially in the Hebrew, but also in the English. You're going to see the pain. You're going to see the frustration. You're going to see what Moshe is troubled with. And what I think Moshe is troubled with is the fact that he feels like the people are not getting the message. The message is our job is to be a menorah. Our job is to produce spiritual light. Instead, what the people want is meat. Moshe cannot handle that. Very interesting, I think, to contemplate that. What seems like a bigger sin? You're Moshe. You have the first 10 commandments. You told the Jewish people 10 commandments. God said the 10 commandments. Don't serve idols. Serve the one God, don't serve idols. The people serve idols. What does Moshe do? He doesn't care. In other words, he's not upset at the people. He goes to God and says, God, you have no choice. You have to forgive them. That's all. When the people ask for meat, Moshe tells God, I give up. I'm not the parent. I'm not the mother. Don't blame me for this. Please kill me. I can't deal with these people. What's a bigger sin? Is it a bigger sin to serve an idol, or is it a bigger sin to ask for meat? I also want meat. What's the big sin? So the commentaries explain that what's happening here is that from Moshe's perspective, if you serve idols, what does that mean? You're searching for spirituality in the wrong place. Okay, but your desire to connect to something intangible, your desire to connect to something transcendent is a beautiful thing. Okay, you made a mistake. You thought this got it. You thought the stone has got it. You thought the golden calf has got it. Not God. Okay, but you're looking for something greater than self. You're looking for something spiritual. You're looking for something transcendent. That Moshe can understand. That mistake is fine. It's a fine mistake. Looking for meat, from Moshe's perspective, that's completely physical. It's like you're missing the point. That's not why we brought you to Sinai. That's not why we told you about the menorah. And Moshe cannot handle that. And what does God tell Moshe? God tells Moshe, relax. Relax. You can want meat and you can want spirituality and you can bridge the two, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world. And we'll see how that goes. But that's really the story of our life. The story of our life is to balance the meat and the desire for meat and the physical desires that we have with the spiritual aspirations that we should have, which is the menorah. So now we'll read it in the words of the Torah and we'll see what we can make of this. On the 20th, chapter 10, on the 20th of the second month. So the second Passover is the 14th of the second month. So this is less than a week after the second Passover. We had the second Passover, now we're ready to move. On the 20th of the second month in the second year, the cloud rose up from the tabernacle of testimony. The children of Israel traveled on their journeys from the Sinai desert, and the cloud settled in the desert of Paran. They made the first journey. They journeyed away from Sinai. And then you have many verses that describe how they traveled based on the formation that we read about earlier in the Torah. They say bye to Jethro, who wants to go back to his land. That's another story for another year. When the ark traveled, this is what the people would say. So they just started. They just leave. As soon as they leave, immediately after they leave, the complaint starts. The people were looking to complain, and it was evil in the ears of the Lord. Heard and anger flared, and people complained, people died. Okay, the people cried out to Moses. Say my internet is unstable. To the Lord, and the fire died down. Named the place Taberah, for the fire of the Lord had burned among them. Okay. Does anyone, if you hear me and you could say yes, that would be wonderful. Vicky, can you hear me?
We can hear you. You're just going in and out.
I hear you.
Okay.
If it was unclear, would you repeat that?
Yes, I'm gonna repeat that right now. Okay. Well, I think I had a bump in the road. That's like sort of what we're doing here in the story. Okay. So the people were looking
You're
to
very
complain.
low, Rabbi.
Okay, I'm gonna know what to do. Maybe I'll sign in from here. Okay, well, I'm going to try to change I'm going to try to change to my phone. That may be better. Give me just a second. In any case, what's happening here is the people complained. It doesn't say what the complaint was, but they complained and the people died. Okay, let me see if I could.
Can hear you.
You're fine now.
You're fine.
Fine?
Now.
Okay, fine.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so the people complained to God. The people complained, doesn't say what they complained about. Read verse 1. The people were looking to complain. God killed them, killed some people. Okay, and he named the place Taverah, for the fire of the Lord had burned among them. there. But the multitude among them began to have strong cravings. Then even the children of Israel once again began to cry and said, who will feed us meat? We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge. The cucumbers, the watermelons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our bodies are dried out, for there is nothing at all. We have nothing but manna to look at. Now the Torah tells you a few verses about advertising about how great the manna is, but we're going to skip that. Moses heard the people. By the way, what does it mean that they said in verse 5? Remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge. Rashi says that's ludicrous. They did not eat anything in Egypt free of charge. They were slaves. Rashi says that they didn't even give them the straw to make the bricks. They certainly didn't give them free sushi. So what's going on? And this is a very beautiful interpretation. Rashi says chinam, doesn't say free of charge. It says we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free. What does for free mean? Rashi says chinam min hamitzvot, free from the mitzvot. We had no moral obligation to God, right? Here, yes, God gives us the manna. God's taking care of us, but he's got a whole list of demands. I'd rather go back in Egypt, and whatever I had in Egypt, there I have no moral difficulty. So you understand how they're really rejecting when they're saying we remember the fish. They don't mean we like the taste of sushi. They mean we like the freedom. Freedom, they weren't free. They physically weren't free, but they didn't have any moral obligation. And that is really a rejection of everything that the Torah stands for, which is why Moshe is so upset. And here you see what Moshe goes over the top. Moses heard the people weeping with their families, each one at the entrance of his tent. The Lord became very angry, and Moses considered it evil. Verse 11, Moses said to the Lord, why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not favor in your eyes that you place the burden of this entire people upon me? And this is a beautiful verse that follows is the job description of a leader, which is really the job description of the mother, because Moses says, I'm not the mother. If I'm the mother, I got to do all this, but I'm not the mother. So what do you see? This is what the mother does. Did I conceive this entire people? Did I give birth to them? That you say to me, carry them in your bosom as the nurse carries the suckling to the land that you promised your forefathers? Am I the mother? I have to take care of these people. I have to carry them to Israel? What do you want from me? Where can I get meat to give all these people? For they are crying to me saying, give us meat to eat. Alone I cannot carry this entire people, for it is too hard for me. If this is the way you treat me, please kill me if I have found favor in your eyes, so that I do not see my misfortune. And what does God say? Moshe is like totally bent out of shape. What does God say? God says like this. God says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to appoint 70 people to help you, because Moshe says I can't do it alone. I'll appoint other people to help you. But God is not sort of upset. And what's happening here is that God is showing Moshe that his light could be conveyed to the rest of the people, but he has to understand that not everybody is on his level. And therefore the 70 people are sort of going to be the people who are in between Moshe's lofty spiritual perspective and the perspective of the rest of the people. And there's a beautiful Rashi here. There's a Rashi that says, I will come down and speak with you there, and I will increase the spirit that is upon you and bestow it upon them. Let me look for the Rashi. Verse 25. Okay, let's find the Rashi. Let's find 25. I just like this Rashi because it comes full circle with the whole parsha. No, it's not 25. This is the Rashi, beautiful. I will come down and speak to you there, and I will increase the spirit that is upon you and bestow it upon them. Then they will bear the burden of the people with you, so that you need not bear it alone. That's verse 27. That's verse 17. So basically you have Moshe. God says, I'm going to take the spirit from you and put it upon them. Now, what are you going to take? Is Moshe going to lose anything? So Rashi says, no, Moshe is not going to lose anything. It's like a candle. A candle, one candle could light 100 candles. But here's look at Rashi's description. And bestow it upon them. I'm pointing on the screen. What did Moses resemble at that time? A candle placed upon a menorah, a candelabrum. Everyone lights from it, yet its brightness is not diminished. That's the Medrash. Why do I like this? Because here you see at the end of the Parsha, connects you to the beginning of the Parsha. Because what's the beginning of the Parsha? The beginning of the Parsha is Moshe says, God says, we all are menorahs. Aaron's job is to light the menorah. The menorah represents all the collective Jewish people, the 7 branches coming from the same stem. We're all connected. That's our mission statement. That's our job. Moshe is frustrated. Why is Moshe frustrated? Because the people want meat. And he thinks that if you want meat, you cannot want spirituality. And God says, take it easy. Because you are on a level that you're totally transcendent from the physical reality. But everybody else, there could be 70 elders that will help you communicate your ideals to the people. And the people, each one comes with their candle, comes to the menorah, and gets the fire. And that's a wonderful thing, because we could have both of these desires together. In other words, the physical person who wants meat can also still learn to desire and connect to God. And of course, the end of the video, we don't have time to get into it because it's 11 o'clock, and unfortunately I have to run. But the end of the story is that they really selected 70. Whole story. There's 2 prophets that prophesize, and Eldad and Medad. They're not getting into the story right now. They prophesied. The people are very upset. The young man runs to Moses and says, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. They're running rogue. We have 2 prophets that are just doing their own thing. Why is he so upset? Because according to the Medrash, what they said is they prophesied Moshe is going to die and Joshua is going to bring the Jewish people into Israel. So it's an attack on Moshe. So Joshua, the lad is Joshua. Joshua runs to Moshe and says, we got to lock these people up. Joshua, son of Nun, Moshe's servant from the youth, answered and said to Moses, my master, imprison them. You can't just have 2 prophets running loose. Who knows what they're going to say? They're going to undermine the whole institution of prophecy. They're going to undermine Moshe. What does Moshe say? Probably the most beautiful verse in the 5 books of Moses. Moses said to them, are you zealous for my sake? If only all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord will bestow his spirit upon them. What does Moshe say? What's the threat? The threat is that there's more prophets. That's exactly what Moshe wants. That's exactly what Moshe is trying to deal with in this parsha, that the people who want meat should indeed become prophets. That's what Moshe wants. That's his mission statement. And indeed, in the prophets, in the book of the prophets, Isaiah says, if I'm not mistaken, it's Isaiah, he says that in the times of Mashiach, I'm going to spill, says God, Eshbech Esruchi, I'm going to spill my spirit upon everybody, and your sons and daughters are going to prophesy. The same verse here, the same expression, the Lord will bestow his spirit upon them, that indeed at the end of days, we will all become prophets and we'll all experience the spirit of God. All I'm trying to say here is that the tension, the people complain. What did they complain? It doesn't say. Many people believe they complained that they were excluded from the service of the temple. Because in the beginning of the parsha, you mentioned the Levites. The Levites are around the temple. They complain we're excluded from being part of the temple. They feel like they're being pushed away from God. So they say, oh, you're going to push me away from God? So what do I want? I want meat, right? They can't do the balance. They don't realize that you don't have to be a Levite. You can still have a relationship with God. And that's what we're going to continue. This tension, this back and forth, we're going to continue reading about in the next 2 portions. And ultimately, hopefully, by the time we get to Israel, we figure out how to keep the balance between what the Kabbalah calls the running and the returning, the being connected to spirituality, yet grounded in this physical earth. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. I'm glad you're joining me for the journey, pun intended, because we're journeying through the desert and the journey of the Parsha. Have a wonderful day, and it's good to see everybody participating. We should meet each other in good health.
Beautiful.
Chaim.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.